Hello there, Joranish Whiskey Lore, and the last video of the year, and this is the finale for Bracketology, my Bracketology, what is my favorite whiskey from all the whiskeys that I have previewed this year on the channel. Now, once I got down to this point, there had to be a decision made, and the decision was, do I continue to pair up until I get to number one, or do I just tell you what my top four are? And I thought, well, I've discussed these whiskeys enough that you know what they taste like by this point. So I'll give a little overview here. We'll do it just one more time and let you know why I'm picking one particular whiskey over the other. There's some whiskeys that didn't make this competition that I would consider to be really good whiskeys that, well, because either I didn't have the whiskey I'm having to do the tasting to be able to pair these things up and doing the comparison video. So if I drank all my sample, or I had, been on a trip to Ireland, for instance, then there were whiskeys that I had there that I really enjoyed, from like Dublin Liberties and from Dunvilles and from Limavady, which I did actually get into the countdown, Mickle. There were some really great whiskeys that I enjoyed on that trip, but can't have them in here because, unfortunately, I just don't have them to do the samples. So these are the ones that I actually had samples of. There were also a couple of whiskeys that I really would have liked to have included, like my Dunvilles, that I drank the sample earlier on because I only had a small one, and so I couldn't bring it in to do in this. I didn't know I was going to do this, actually. And another was the Jack Daniel's American Single Malt, which I am still hunting for a bottle of that, and hopefully at some point I will come across it. So the whiskey of the year is sitting in that glass right there, and if you know what the top four that I had remaining are, maybe you could guess which whiskey that is, but I don't think you could, because these whiskeys are amazingly similar in color. So let's start, first of all, I decided to do this as a top five. So out of my Elite 8, 4 have been booted, but I decided to pick my favorite out of those 4 to be my number 5 whiskey of the year. This one, tons of sea character to this. It's a whiskey that I've gone through a couple of bottles of it, and this bottle is already running out, and I'm going to be buying another bottle surely in the new year. It's a distillery that I wish next time I go to it, I hope next time I go to it, I might have a chance to do it behind the scenes and get a chance to taste this whiskey straight from the barrel, because they don't offer this in a cask strength version that I know of, and it would be really interesting because this is such a great whiskey, and it would be nice to taste it at a little bit higher ABV. This comes in at 43% ABV. The whiskey I am talking about is Talisker 10. Talisker 10, I got to tell you, this is one of those whiskeys that for a long time sat on my shelf, and it's kind of like I took it for granted. It doesn't have an overly exciting label. It doesn't scream out at you, pick me up. And in fact, they've just changed the label now. They actually kind of stole the West Cork, cut-in design on their labels. But it's kind of just sat there, and then I drink all this other stuff around it, and then when I taste this, I'm like, why am I not drinking this? I love this whiskey. Really great whiskey. So Talisker, I felt, was worthy of bringing in. It is aged in an American oak barrel, so it brings in that caramel, but it brings in the sea character, a little bit of the brininess, and the smoke that comes in there, a little barbecue scent comes in there as well. And it's just a really nice overall whiskey, and one that pairs nicely with seafood if you ever so need a whiskey for that particular need. Number 4 is a whiskey that I went out and bought an extra bottle of. In fact, I've sort of sensed when I started putting this thing together, which whiskeys would you have to go fight to see if you could find a bottle of, and that was one of my criteria for ranking these whiskeys beyond just flavor, because once you get to this top 4, it becomes really, really tough to pick out which is the best whiskey. And so This is a whiskey that wins on body. It is just a beautiful mouthfeel to this whiskey. It has some of my favorite flavors to it. It has a salt caramel. It's got the smoke in as well. Smoke, obviously a theme, as 4 out of my top 5 all are smoky whiskeys in one way or another. So detecting a theme there. But a little bacon note here, a little foresty smoke on top of it. I'm surprised I didn't make this number 3. Number 4, Glenallachie Torfa. And this is a whiskey that you can find for around $50-$55 a bottle. And I'm telling you, get it while people don't know what it is, because it is just a really great whiskey. And the only reason it came in at number 4 rather than higher is because it is a whiskey for a particular mood. The whiskeys that I have above this are more diverse than this, but this is just a really pleasant drinking whiskey with flavors that I truly enjoy. So Glenallachie is my number 4 whiskey. My number 3 whiskey, this one is what I call a whiskey that gets overlooked. And I think that bourbon fans really do know it and appreciate it for what it is, but the general public kind of just passes it by. To me, because they're caught up in we got to get Buffalo Trace because that's on allocation, or Eagle Rare because that's on allocation, or any of those whiskeys from Buffalo Trace, Blanton's, down the list, right? So what is the MSRP on Blanton's? I think it's like $45 or $50, and yet people are charging $100+ for it. I see Buffalo Trace now selling a liter the other day I saw for $109. Are you kidding me? Buffalo Trace is a really good whiskey. It is another one that I keep around and really enjoy. But it's not my favorite whiskey from that region. There are whiskeys that are cheaper than that are easily found, that I think are better than that, including Old Forester 100, Wild Turkey 101, and this whiskey, which I believe is it's got nice balance to it. It is consistent. It is Four Roses Small Batch at number 3, Four Roses Small Batch. What's interesting about this whiskey is, like the whiskeys that end up in my top 3, it brings a lot of things to the table. So you get a little bit of the rye that's in this. You actually get a little cherry note in here, which is something that I usually suggest goes with something that you would get out of wheated whiskeys. So that comes in a little bit too, even though there's no wheat in this. And then it also brings, those traditional bourbon flavors, but it's got a little leather note in it, so it's showing a little bit of age in there as well. I mean, to me, and then it has that nutty character as well. It's just a really great bourbon. And I know there's people who are going to say, hey, if I'm going Four Roses, I'm going single barrel. I will get a bottle of single barrel in the new year and try it out, because I've had it in the past, but I have not put it, ahead of buying small batch when I go to the store, because to me, I love the consistency of this product, and I worry a little bit that when I buy single barrel, I'm either getting a good one or maybe I'm getting one that's not as good, something on either side of this, whereas here I know I have a dependable favorite. So small batch Four Roses, fantastic distillery, and honestly, whenever you have somebody who's saying, what should my first bourbon be? What should I drink to get into bourbon? I think Four Roses you can't miss. All right, number 2. And of course, if you've watched, as I've counted down through these, as soon as I as soon as I show you what number 2 is, you're going to know what number 1 is. But for the rest of you, one will be a surprise. Number 2, what I love is with number 2 and number 1, and it was It's a little bit of a hard choice choosing between the two of them. Number 2 has what to me has a very personal choice flavor profile, something that I really love from a brand that has a very distinct character to it. And it is part of the reason why I put this at number 2, because it's more of an individual choice sort of thing. But number 1 actually did win out on flavor as well to me, because it was a little bit more complex than this. But both of these whiskeys fall in that category of sherry and smoke. And when I started out with sherry and smoke, I had Bowmore 18, and I thought that was really good. And then I had, it's escaping me now. Anyway, I went through, Kilchoman Sonic, and that became a big favorite of mine. And since then, I've been challenging my palate and trying to find things that I like even better than that. And so my top 2 fall into that category. But number 2 has a very signature type flavor to it that comes from the distillery. And when I say the distillery, you're going to go, yep, absolutely, that has its own distinct flavor. It is Laphroaig. This is Carchus. Carchus is probably around 8 years old in terms of age. It is a really nice base whiskey that's been aged in PX casks. And to me, the aging in PX casks is actually pretty inspired for this whiskey, because when I, about a year ago, was doing a taste test between Lagavulin 9 and Laphroaig 10, kept picking the wrong whiskey as Laphroaig. And I started trying to figure out, why am I picking the wrong one every single time? And it's because I would think that Laphroaig is more earthy than Lagavulin, but in reality, it's a little sweeter than Lagavulin. And so that mix of sweet, along with the sweetness that comes out of this cask strength Carchus, aged in that PX, which is a little bit sweeter, is going to bring you some more of those berry kind of flavors, which seem to do so nicely with, and pair so nicely with, the Laphroaig flavor profile. Cask strength, love this stuff. It's a little bit more aggressive. It's hard to find too, because unfortunately it's a limited edition, so we'll have to wait for Laphroaig to come out with another one in that range, but I had to put it up there. I just, such a great whiskey. Okay, where is my number 1? Number 1, my whiskey of the year, comes from Speyside. So this is a big difference between the two, plus it is not a cask strength. This is going to be around 43% ABV. It comes from a very small distillery that does not have a huge reputation at this point. You know, when people start drinking Scotch whiskey, they're going to think Macallan. This is right down the road from Macallan. If they start to learn a little bit more about whiskey, they may get into the Glendronachs, you know, and be in that area. This is a distillery that does not quite have the exposure that those do, because it is a smaller distillery, but I think they do an amazing job with their whiskeys. I've had a 10-year, I've had a non-age stated, and this, the champion for this year, is a 15-year. And for a guy who is always like, age doesn't really matter as much as flavor, what I like about this whiskey is that 15 years in the barrel, it does not become too subtle, and it doesn't become too oaky. It is a really nice overall all-in-one whiskey. When I say all-in-one whiskeys, all-in-one scotches, I've always pointed to Highland Park 12. But Highland Park 12, the one thing it doesn't really have is that age end of the flavor spectrum. So when I had Highland Park 18, it felt like it went a little too far. This is the middle ground. It'd be really interesting to taste a Highland Park 15 year, but this is the champion. It's the Highland Park. It comes from Speyside. It is Benromach 15. Benromach 15 to me is, it's just got everything in a glass. This is something to really enjoy and savor. It brings some of those leather notes and oak notes that you would expect to get out of an older whiskey, but it's filled with berries. I get like a strawberry shortcake note off of this. I get, there's a little pepper note that pops in at the end. It's got that smoke. The smoke is there, but it's not as out front. Like I say, Laphroaig is a little heavy-handed versus this. A little more subtle. Little plum, you get some of those darker fruit notes in there as well. This is aged in both bourbon and sherry barrels, so it's giving you a nice little in between. I even get a bubblegum note out of it. It's interesting. Oh yeah, I love that berry. And then into plum. And then into that kind of peppery finish at the end. With always with that little leather and oak surrounding it. Just a really pleasant drinking whiskey, and one that, oh, the berries are now coming through. It's a little strawberry jam going on there. Yeah, it's just an extremely pleasant whiskey with a little smoke note. It's not overly smoky, and it's more of a foresty smoke than that more medicinal smoke that you would be getting out of the Laphroaig. I just think it's an exceptional whiskey. Now, of course, this bottle is an old bottle, and they now have changed the logo. So if you were going to go look for it, you're looking for a white label with big red block letters that say Benromach on it. This is the third design that they've had over the last 10 years. And that was the second design, but I just think it's an excellent whiskey. And if I was going to recommend to somebody who wants to taste an all-around whiskey, Highland Park has been that one for me for a while, but I think the quality out of Benromach stuff is so good. And Gordon MacPhail, their parent company, are actually building a new distillery just south of there. If you've seen the James Bond No Time to Die movie, by the way, it's being built somewhere around the area where, if you watch in that movie, when they're in Norway and going through and you see the Range Rovers all driving, they turn off the road and then they're in the back country. When they're in the back country, that's actually that part of Scotland in the Cairngorm National Park. So, little James Bond tidbit there for you as well. Anyway, that is my top 5. What do you guys think? Do you have a whiskey that you would nominate for your whiskey of the year? Is there one of these out of the top 5 that you think I should have elevated a little bit higher or dropped a little bit lower? It was tough, man. This was tough. Once you start getting into the Elite 8, it became impossible choices, but I feel good with what I came up with. And thanks again for being a part of the channel. I look forward to a fantastic 2023 and look forward to sharing some new bottles with you starting next week. Happy New Year. Until next time, cheers and Slainte. Yep, very happy with that choice.